On April 30th, 1975, at 7:53 a.m., the last US helicopter left Saigon. This symbolized the end of a long and bloody war that claimed millions of lives. After an 8-year intervention, the United States was finally pulling out of Vietnam. But what if they had stayed? Welcome back to Curiosity, and today we'll be discussing what might have happened if the United States actually won the Vietnam War. Could the Cold War have ended earlier? Would America have entered other conflicts? Would there have been a hippie movement? We're talking about all that and more, so stay tuned. For one, there would be no genocide in Cambodia. The Cambodian genocide was the systemic killing of Cambodians carried out by communist dictator Pol Pot. It's estimated that between 1.5 and 3 million people were killed under his regime. In 1968, after 4 years of vicious fighting against the North Vietnamese, the United States military entered Cambodia. It was here they began fighting with the Cambodian communists, particularly the Khmer Rouge outfit. As a result, the Vietnamese communists increased their presence in Cambodia in order to help their neighbors fight off the Americans and South Vietnamese. By 1975, the United States grew exhausted from their fighting in Southeast Asia. Several factors, including unfamiliar terrain, guerrilla warfare, dwindling morale, and decreased support from back home, played roles in their decision to pull out. This only gave more power to the Khmer Rouge. With the Americans gone, they saw this as an opportunity to take over, installing Pol Pot as their leader. From here, they began a systemic reorganization of their society, displacing people from their cities into the countryside. From here, a mass genocide began. But let's say the United States and South Vietnamese win in Vietnam. If this was the case, there would be no need for them to move into Cambodia. Historians argue that this timeline would see no uprising of the Khmer Rouge, and as a result, no Cambodian genocide. A win for the Americans means more war against communism. So the US sees victory in Vietnam. What next? Well, chances are the United States military becomes involved in other anti-communist conflicts across the globe. Since communism has fallen in Vietnam, it can surely happen in other totalitarian countries. In reality, America's loss in Vietnam discouraged them from further fighting with other communist regimes. In many ways, you can say they were humbled, but a victory against the North Vietnamese just means a more aggressive foreign policy against communism. The US military stays in Southeast Asia, increasing tension with Russia and China. From here, the Cold War could escalate. China would certainly not take kindly to an American victory in Vietnam. While they're not massive supporters of the Vietnamese, they would likely come to their aid. Either way, the chances of conflict between the two largest superpowers on Earth would increase. Who knows, another world war could spark up within the next few years. Even if the US won the war, communist rebels would still be fighting. Long after the war is won, what's left of the Viet Cong vanishes into the jungles, where they continue their guerrilla tactics on the Americans. In their eyes, Vietnam has not surrendered, and the American invader must fall at all costs. As countless more Americans die, the US military is forced to spend more money on resources to combat the remaining rebel soldiers. The US military increases its presence in North Vietnam, installing more security on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This is the name for the supply route used by the Viet Cong to move into the south. While the remaining rebels put up a fight, they dwindle in strength as time goes by, eventually disappearing. Things turn out well for the South Vietnamese. After the war was lost, many South Vietnamese were forced to flee their homeland. otherwise suffering the wrath of the North Vietnamese over their support of the American invaders. Around 1 million people were taken from their homes and relocated to the country's rural mountain region. This was part of the so-called New Economic Zones program. Others weren't as lucky. Close to 300,000 South Vietnamese were captured and sent to communist re-education camps. It was here countless people were tortured and killed. To avoid this fate, millions of others fled the country by boat, with an estimated 400,000 dying at sea. But none of this happens if the US wins the war. The South Vietnamese are not subjected to relocation and genocide. While they will be forced to rebuild their divided nation, their chances of death are not as great as the North Vietnamese are no longer in power. There are other scenarios where the South Vietnamese are victorious, even if the United States decided not to intervene in Vietnam. The South Vietnamese still would have had a chance at victory. Even if the Americans did not physically join the fight, they perhaps would have given the South Vietnamese financial support. This means providing money for weapons to fight off the North Vietnamese, very similar to what they're doing right now for the Ukrainians. While this method would undoubtedly cause controversy stateside, it may still secure a victory for the South Vietnamese forces, allowing them to win control of their country. Also, for the sake of conversation, let's say the United States still pulls out of Vietnam in 1975. They would be smart to provide the remaining Vietnamese forces with artillery in order to fight off the Viet Cong. The South wins the war and begins the reconstruction of Vietnam. The United States continues its support for the South Vietnamese and helps them develop a strong economy as a capitalist nation. It's not just Southeast Asia that sees change. A win for the Americans means a different history for the United States as well. There is no anti-war movement in the United States. The American counterculture movement in the United States is one of the defining moments of the 1960s. Everything from sex, drug use, music, and fashion changed during this decade. American polarization against the Vietnam War served as a springboard for other taboo subjects of the time. People took to streets and college campuses, organizing protests, walkouts, and sit-ins. But with no war to fight abroad, the movement doesn't begin as quickly. As a result, things look a lot different in the US culturally. There arguably wouldn't be as many open conversations about sexuality, drug use, and religion. There also may not have been as many great movies and music. America's cultural influence around the world is not as powerful, which ends up hurting them as a superpower. America also takes a turn politically. Not only would culture change in the United States, politics would also look much different. The Vietnam War began the era of deep-seated distrust for the US government. While the war did start under Democratic leadership, people who were more liberal-minded generally opposed America's involvement in Vietnam, while conservatives were quicker to defend it. Even though the right and left never actually saw eye to eye, the 1960s saw dramatic polarization between Democrats and Republicans, a tension that has grown more hostile with each passing decade. If the United States won the war and Vietnam became a thriving capitalist democracy, many of the war's opponents would have a newfound faith in the American military, even if they were correct in their criticism to begin with. History is full of what-if scenarios. Care to learn more? Let's keep your curiosity going with a couple more videos, shall we? Here's what you need to know. Check out What If World War I Never Happened? Or how about moving to science with What If Space Was Breathable? Go ahead, click one. Or better yet, watch both and learn more about the world around you. Which historical what if would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments below.